If you stand just beyond the lime kilns at Tong when the wind comes right, as my uncle always said, you can taste the stone. It's like a ghost of chalk on your tongue, a dry whisper that makes you want to cough, even if you pretend you're too tough for that. My name is Cavallo. I was 12 that year and I lived in Tong, the place of the lion, though the only lion I ever saw was on the label of the matches my father kept tucked in his cap. Still, if you slept outside in the courtyard on a clear night and the jackals complained and the windmill let out its slow, squeaking groan, you might hear something like a lion far, far away. My grandmother said it was the earth remembering. She also said that our ground was older than any cities, and that if you looked carefully you could find the bones of time itself. When I woke, the lime dust was already sitting on the window ledge like flour. I rubbed the crust from my eyes and felt the heat of another day squeezing out of the sky. It was 1924, but I didn't know years in that way then. I knew it was the season of dry breath, when the sheep nosed for old grass and the river pulled its water in like someone greedy with a secret. Up, Cavallo, my mother said, slapping her hands against her apron to shake off the mealy flour. She wore a blue shwi skirt with little white flowers, and a headscarf knotted at the back. Your father has early shift. Take him the water and be swift. I yanked on my shorts, the ones with patches on the patches, and my shirt with only one button that still worked. The sun hadn't climbed over the thorn trees yet, and the air smelled like cold ash and warm stones. Our donkey brayed from the little yard behind our house, where the thorn fence kept the goats in and the hyenas out. The donkey was named Mopane because he ate everything as if it had little green leaves on it. He nibbled the edge of the water tin I strapped to his back, then looked at me with those sideways eyes that always made him seem like he was laughing. Don't you start, I told him. We have to go. The path to the lime works ran along the bottom of a low ridge. On one side were the little houses, some built of stone, some of old tin, some with mats thrown over their roofs to make more shade, and on the other, the open ground where wind bowed the thorn trees. The lime kilns were set against the hill, and in the early light their chimneys looked like broken fingers pointing at the sky. Already they were breathing white smoke going up in lazy sighs. Men were moving in the pale dust down in the quarry, their figures small as matchsticks. Down there, they cut the stone and fed the kilns, and burned limestone until it turned to quicklime, which would bite your hands if you were careless. My father had hands like tough rope, brown and scarred, with white scars from the stone. He wore a flat cap and an old shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows. He carried a pick and a sledge and sometimes gelignite if he was working with the blasting crew. If you didn't know the quarry, you could get lost in the noise, the clang of hammers, the wheels of carts squeaking, the far-off caw of birds that liked to steal scraps from the men's lunches. It made a music that got in your bones. At the gate to the quarry, I stood for a moment and just watched. The new sun spilled across the terrace, making everything look clean, even though there was dust on every face and in every mouth. A white man with a straw hat and gloves stood with his hands on his hips, talking to another man whose suspenders cut tired lines on his shoulders. One of the boilers chuffed and hissed. The air had the sour taste of lime and the sweetness of someone's tea. My father saw me and lifted his chin. He was not tall, not the way the supervisor was tall, but to me, he was the size of a thorn tree that had been there since the beginning. I could always spot him by the way he walked, with one shoulder set higher than the other, like he was carrying a heavy thing that no one else could see. "Ah, boy," he said, and took the tin I had carried on the donkey. He drank and let the water run down his throat. "You came fast today." "I raced Mopane all the way from home," I said. "He only won because he cut the corner at MMA Lehas's garden." "Of course he did," my father said, picking up his sledgehammer again. That donkey would cheat his own mother. He put his hand on my head for a second, pushing my hair, as if he was reaching into my skull to make sure there was something there. "Stay up on the ridge," he said. "We're blasting after the big bell." I could always tell the blasting days because everyone was busy in a different way, like the ground had a heartbeat you couldn't see. Men in overalls and boots ran rope across the ground to warn people away. The supervisor checked his watch too much. My father and the blasting crew went quiet, the kind of quiet that holds words under the tongue. I knew to keep Mopane's lead tight and to find a place far enough that nothing could bite my skin. It's strange what you get used to. In the afternoon, the wind had a taste of metal from the drill. At night, the dust settled in your hair so that when you ran your fingers through, it was like combing the small beach of a strange sea. We ate pap and stew, or sometimes pap without stew. The women talked as they pounded sorghum, rhythm like a drum. Someone's radio was a mystery, crackling with far voices when the batteries were strong and coughing when they were not. When the train went past Vryburg Way, my friends and I would run to the embankment and wave, and sometimes the driver would stick his arm out the window and wave back, and once a coal man threw us a little bag of something sweet that I swear tasted of both molasses and smoke. That year, a letter came from Johannesburg. I know this because Mr. Evers, who ran the quarry, stood up on the platform outside the office and read it aloud with a serious face. He was pale under his hat, and he always had a short piece of pencil stuck over his ear, and a way of saying right when nothing was right at all. The letter was from a professor. This impressed everyone in an angry way, like a wasp in a jar. The professor was a new head of something called anatomy at a big university, and he wrote that if the quarrymen at Tong found any strange bones or stone skulls, jaws, anything that looked like old animals, they should put them aside and send them to him. There was talk that the hills in our area held old bones like a secret pocket. The professor had already seen fossil teeth from our region, he wrote. He wanted more. "They want monkey skulls," one man said and laughed. He had a laugh like he was chewing rocks. "That will make the world better." Another said, "They want anything to put in a glass case. They will name it after themselves." This other man was Tao, which means lion, but nobody was scared of him because he was skinny as a string and his boots had holes big enough to show his toes. He smiled like he knew a secret nobody else knew. Some said he had a way with the donkeys, that he could whisper to them so they moved at his hand like water. He showed me once how to braid twine from grass that would not break. "If they want odd bones," my father said to me on the way home that night, "they will get them. This ground eats everything and spits out rocks. It will spit out someone's tooth sooner or later." "Maybe it will spit out a whole person," I said, and my father laughed and said, "Then we would have to pay him a fair wage." From that day, the men were told, "Keep your eyes sharp. If you find something that looks like old bone in the stone, don't throw it to the kills. Put it in a box." Mr. Evers went to look himself, but he never found anything. That's because he didn't have the right eyes. The right eyes are the eyes you get when you spend your whole childhood finding needles and marbles and goats that can slip like smoke between villages. The men laughed about it at first. In the hot light of the midday, with dust turning all of us into ghosts, they made jokes about long-dead beasts and a professor who collected bones like a magpie. "There is a river of bones under us," Tao said, wiping sweat off his face with his wrist, "held in rock the way a fish is held in salt. If you try to pull it out too quick, it crumbles." He said a lot of things like that. About 2 weeks after the letter came, the big bell rang and the workers cleared. You could feel it more than hear it at first, a tremble in the feet. The blasting crew ducked and the air swelled and the sound hit. First a crack, then a boom. The ground jumped and dust rose up like a gin. After a while, the dust fell and the men walked back to the edge to see what they had made. From where I sat on the ridge with Mopane's lead around my hand, my heart beating quick like the quill of a spring hare, I could see my father and Tao and the others moving along the apron of rock, picking with steel bars at the cracked face. They pried loose chunks of stone, their movements careful and practiced. Tao had a way of testing the rock with a small hammer, tapping and listening like he was hearing the stone speak. He could hear when it was ready to give and when to leave it. I let Mopane wander in a circle around me, the lead rope squeaking against the loop of my thumb. A grasshopper landed on my knee and rubbed its hind legs like it was sharpening them. I thought about what might be under my feet, a whole herd of stone animals lying so quietly that even the wind forgot them. I imagined a man frozen like a lizard, and tried to think what his name might have been. Sometimes I named the stones so they wouldn't be lonely. This smooth one could be my friend Noko, this bigger one could be my father, this crack between rocks could be a laughing mouth. The men were stacking the big blocks on the sledges for the donkeys. Tao picked up a piece of rock and turned it in his hands. He called to my father, words were lost in the distance. I could tell from the way he held it that he was excited, this not eating, not sleeping kind of excited where your eyes get sharp and your mouth forgets to close. He turned the rock and the sun hit it and something in it flashed like a tooth. I couldn't help myself. I stood up and the rope slipped in my hand and Mopane barked a donkey laugh and put his head down to graze. I slid down the loose slope to the edge of the quarry as if my feet had ideas I hadn't told them. My father shouted my name and I shouted back, I'm up here, even though I clearly was not. I stopped at the rope line and Tao looked up and saw me, and he grinned in a way that said, you again. What is it? I called. Is it a snake? If it is a snake, I will. It's no snake, Tao said. He held up the rock. I narrowed my eyes. At first, it looked like any other chunk of stone, brown with chalk white in it, the surface rough and strange, like baked bread broken open. But on one side I saw a hollow like a bowl, and a bit of curve that made me think of an eye socket, the way when you look at someone sideways and all you see is the edge of their face. I leaned further over the rope without meaning to, and the rope bit my stomach. There was a feeling you get when you see something new, a cold hot feeling like the air around you has changed shape and you're a hand moving through water. Don't lean, boy, my father said. But he couldn't keep his eyes off the rock in Tao's hands either. What is that? He took it, rubbed his thumb over the curve. Just a funny lump, Tao said slowly. He sounded like he wanted to tell himself that and make it true. But maybe one of those funny lumps the professor likes. The sun made everything look like it was sweating. The men gathered around. Some had tea in tin mugs, someone took a slow sip and set the mug down on a rock without looking away. Evers came, his gloves white as bones. He took the rock and held it up. He made that face he made sometimes, the one that said he was trying to look like a man who already knew everything. He turned it, and I saw what Tao had seen, a bit of a jaw, maybe. Not a whole jaw, not like the ones hanging in the butcher's shop in town, but a piece with the hint of teeth under the smooth stone. Put it in the crate, Evers said. And any more like it? Handle with a bit of care, if you can. It's all money anyway. They had kept a crate aside to collect what they called oddments, things that didn't look right for the kill. Sometimes they found bits of animals that were not really stone at all, just bones with a crust, and the men would flick them aside with a boot and keep working. Now they laid this piece in the crate like an egg. There was a second piece with something like a curve. Then a third that looked like it would fit like puzzle with the first if you tried. Nobody tried. The crate was lined with straw from the donkey's bedding to keep the rocks from chipping each other. They put the lid down and my heart made a sound in my chest like the lid closing. As it turned out, it was just another day. The men went back to their hammers. The kills kept breathing. I took Mopane home and got in trouble for not keeping to the ridge. My grandmother looked at me and said, "You have dust in your ears and a stone on your mind." I wanted to tell her about the rock with the hollow, but my tongue wasn't ready to let my thoughts out and I kept them under it, tasting stone. Maybe it would have ended there, things often do. The next day the train came as usual and took sacks of lime and men with tired faces back towards Kimberley. 2 days later, a truck with shaky tires took the crate with oddments to the station to go to Johannesburg. People wrestled with the crates like they were wrangling a fat goat, using ropes and shouting. My father was careful with that one crate for no reason that he could have told you. Then the truck went away and a small thing went with it. We had a teacher at the little school by the mission church. His name was Mr. Molve. He had a tidy little mustache, good shoes he must have saved for a long time to buy, and a way of saying something once and making you listen. He had a blackboard that leaned in our classroom like a tired man. We used slates and chalk. He taught us the names of places on a ragged map: Kimberley, where the diamonds sit in the earth like eyes; Johannesburg, where the gold mines spin the ground into money and the wind makes the mine dumps look like little mountains; London, where, he said, the rain was always thinking about falling. He taught us to say sentences like "this is a cup" and to point to the cup, and I never got tired of that, because it made the world be something you could hold. The day after the crate left, Mr. Molve said, "Children, do you know what an ancient thing is?" He wrote the word on the board. Ancient. The chalk squeaked. It is a thing that saw many winters and summers before your grandmother ever sang the songs you know. It is a thing whose story is longer than a road that goes to the edge of a map. What about the old man who sits by the kilns? Noko said. The one who talks to himself. Do not tease him, Mr. Molve said, but he smiled. He is not ancient. He is just older than your jokes. I am ancient. My shoes are ancient. Our earth is more ancient than anyone's shoes. And our bones. I said, before I knew I would say it. Are our bones ancient? I felt the word in my mouth like a pebble and wanted to feel it again. He looked at me for a long moment, and I realized that I hadn't told anyone about Tao's rock really. I flushed under my dust. Mr. Molve said, your bones will be ancient one day. Someone will turn the earth and find them and wonder what you laughed about. Maybe they will find your chalk and think it was a thing you ate. Maybe they will find your slate with the numbers always wrong. We laughed. The day went on. But that night the wind came straight through the crack in our door and I heard the windmill speak in its old voice, and I couldn't sleep. My grandmother told a story of a man who loved a lion. It was not what you think. It was about a lion who sat down under a thorn tree and let the man sit with him, and the man fell asleep with his head against the lion's rib cage and heard a drum there that was the lion's heart. In the morning, there was just the man and his own heart and the footprints of the lion going straight into the sun. That is how we live with the things that came before us, my grandmother said. We put our heads against them. We listen. We do not claim them. We let them go into the bright place. We follow only with our eyes. Weeks later, there was a letter again. We heard the motor of the truck before we saw it. It came up the track in a little cloud that matched the color of the earth and pulled up with a cough in front of the office. The driver was a tall man with a cap pushed back on his head and a triangle of sunburn on the V of his throat. He jumped down and stretched his back and said, "Water." The men said, always. He carried another letter, a long thin one with a big seal on the back like a lollipop stuck to paper. Mr. Evers held it like a bird he wasn't sure how to pick up. He went inside and someone closed the door and we had to wait with our own hearts trying to open us from the inside. When he came out, he put the paper flat in both hands. "The professor writes," he said. He received our crate. He smiled the way men smile when they have a coin in their pocket they thought they had lost. He says there was a skull in it. The men made a sound with their mouths, a kind of hush that is also a cheer. "A skull," my father said. "Whose?" He said it like he half expected Mr. Evers to say yours, Thato, and point to him. "The skull of a little ape," Mr. Evers said, but he stumbled on the word, and I saw him look to the driver, who seemed to know more than he did. And something like a brain cast. "A what?" Tao said. "A, the inside of the skull," the driver said. He looked embarrassed for using the right word in front of us. "A hollow made full. A thing that shows the shape of what used to be there." The professor sent a sketch, Mr. Evers said, and held up a folded page he had pulled from the letter. He unfolded it, careful, like a man unwrapping a sweet he doesn't know he will like yet. The paper showed a drawing of a small face, the face of a child if you looked quick, but with broad cheekbones and big eye sockets and a jaw that seemed to be waiting to grow. On the back of the face was a roundish thing like the inside of a shell. And at the bottom of that round thing was a hole. Even I knew what the hole was, because when you butcher a goat, you see the hole where the head meets the spine, and it makes you realize that your head is a separate animal that you have to carry around all the time. The driver said, as if he had practiced, "The professor says the hole sits in a place that shows the creature held its head above its spine like a walker on two legs. Not like a monkey that walks with its spine across." We had no word for foramen magnum, but if we did, we wouldn't have used it. We didn't need one anyway, we had the hole where the head sits. "A child," my father said quietly. "A child from the stone." The letter said more, but I didn't care. The words had already moved around what I thought things could be. If you have ever put your hand into a bag and pulled out a thing you didn't know you owned, then you know that feeling, the feeling that your head is too small and your mouth is too dry. The driver read another piece. The professor had written a name for the creature, Australopithecus africanus. He wrote also that he thought the creature had walked upright, and that the child 3 or so years by the teeth had a brain shape that surprised him. Mr. Evers tried to say the name. He got stuck in the middle, we all did. "Australopithecus," he said, and the men laughed and he gave them a look that said he would rather not be laughed at today, please. "Australopithecus," tried. "Austrap. It is a long name for a small head. Ape of the south of Africa," Mr. Molf said to me later, when I ran to the school with the news like my feet were on fire. He wrote it on the board and broke it into pieces. "Austral southern. Pithecus ape. Africanus of Africa. It means they think this one came from here," he said softly, tapping the map with his chalk. He did not need to say what that meant to me. We were used to not being the place things began. "Everyone always says everything starts somewhere else," I said. "That the important things are born far away. That we are only the place things stop to drink." "Maybe not this time," Mr. Molf said. He had a look on his face like a man who hears a song he knows but with different words. "Maybe not this time." From that day, men came and went from the quarry like the wind had learned to drive a truck. There was the driver, who turned out to be a man called Cooper, who worked with the professor sometimes. He had a wife in Johannesburg who liked to make jam, and he told me once that in the city there were traffic policemen with white gloves who showed cars where to go like dancers. He said there was a big building with pillars where the professor worked. He said the professor, Dart, was a small man built like a springbok who turned young men into doctors by telling them where their bones joined. He said the professor had cried when he saw the skull like a child cries when his mother says yes to something important. Cried, my father said, and Cooper shrugged. He is not like other men, he said. He is like a bird, not a little one, a hawk that can see a mouse moving in grass from the sky. He is a bone prophet, Tao said, looking pleased with the words like he'd arranged them on a shelf in a way that made sense. I listened so hard when they spoke that my ears rang. They said the professor found the face inside the block we sent. He had put the block on his windowsill while he got ready for a wedding, and the sun came through the window and showed him what he had been looking for. He knocked the stone off with a little pick like a dentist, and there was the face looking up at him with eyes that were the shape of eyes but not yet eyes. He wrote a paper in a big English journal about it. He sent more letters asking for more pieces. He told them to look for the rest of the skull. He even asked if anyone remembered exactly where in the quarry the block had come from. The men laughed at that because after a blast, stones fall where they please and lie to you about where they came from. We looked. 4 days, 4 weeks, the men tapped and tested. Tao got into the habit of laying anything with the smallest hollow into a wooden box with straw. He'd whack at a face of rock and then stop and tilt his head and say, listen, listen, and I'd say, I hear a rock, and he'd say, yes, but listen to which rock. He taught me to hear the difference too. That is a thing I will keep all my life, the patience inside you like a cat in the shade, waiting for the right movement. People in the village began to talk about the stone child. We had to give it a name because names are nets to keep things from flying. We called it just that, the stone child. The pastor at the mission church said one Sunday that we must be careful with old bones. He said we had to respect the ground that covers the dead. He said we must not let anyone tell us that our grandmother's soul sat a long time in a stone. Mr. Molf nodded, no one argued. Another man stood up at the Kagotla and said, if these men wish to pay us for old rocks, let them. We can buy more goats with rocks than with promises. We all laughed even though it is not really funny. A woman said the devil lives in stones and you can tell because they are hard and cold. Another said the devil likes warm places, like your own heart when you are holding a grudge because you think it will make you warmer on cold nights. There were white men with hats who came and went. Some had soft hands and some had hands that looked like they could tie a donkey to a tree and make a rope from clouds. One had a little camera on a tripod and he took pictures of everything as if he couldn't believe anything was real unless he had it on paper. He took a picture of me once and I tried to stand the way I thought men stand in pictures. I sucked in my stomach and put one hand on my hip and tried to look like the kind of boy who wore good shoes. The man said, relax, and I didn't know what that meant, really, but I tried to do it anyway. When he brought the picture back weeks later, I looked like a boy trying very hard to look like a boy who wasn't trying very hard. My grandmother said, you look proud, and I told her it was only because I had not brushed my hair. One afternoon, the heat pushed on our backs like a hand. The kills huffed like animals. I had brought my father tea and a bit of dried meat my mother had saved. He squatted in the shade of a stack of rocks and ate with the kind of attention that says food is not something to play with. Out on the face, the drill whined and then fell quiet. Evers shouted something and men scattered like birds. The little bell clanged, the one that meant, move out of the way now. My father set his tin down, brushed his hands on his shirt, and stood. I was already moving back to the ridge, to my safe place beside the thorn tree where the wind always tried to take my hat off. Mopane swished his tail and gazed at me with the long-lashed laziness of someone who knows more about patience than you will ever learn. The blast went off, crack, boom, and a wave of air hit me with little fingers. I had my mouth open. Dust rose and, as it always did, covered every thought with its small hands. When it cleared, men walked forward. I saw my father pick his way like a man walking through his own dream. He carried his sledge in his right hand and his left hand open like he was ready to catch something. He stepped onto a ledge and the ledge side. He shifted his foot and I could see even from where I was that his heel went too far and he pulled it back with a little hop. He made a face, not a big one, but I know all my father's faces, and I knew that his ankle had said a bad word. He sat down slow and put his hand around the ankle like he was holding a small bird. Tao came and crouched by him and their heads were close. I ran before anyone called me and slid down the slope and jumped the rope and someone shouted, and I ignored them the way I ignored thirst when I found something good. I am fine, my father said, and then he gritted his teeth and did a little hiss that told everyone his body was telling him he was a liar. Go back, he said to me, but he put his hand on my shoulder the way he always did, and for a moment I was as still as a stone under a leaf. We got him up. We moved him like men move a pot that is not hot but might be. We took him to the little clinic by the mission house where Nurse Abel, who was golden brown and taller than any of the men and had a way of smiling with her eyes while keeping her mouth a straight line, looked at his ankle and said, "Sprain." She wrapped it with a bandage like a white road and told him to stay off it for some days. He listened the way a goat listens when you tell it your plans. While my father slept at home with his foot up on a folded blanket, I went to the quarry for him as his legs, carrying his share of jokes and, if I am honest, some of his frowns at the things Evers said. It is a strange thing to go to a place you know without the person who taught you the shape of it. All the same, I did the things he would have done. I asked Tao what he needed. I put my ear as close to the wind as he did. I took a cup of tea for Mr. Evers just the way my father did because he always said it is good to be useful to people who make your life complicated. That week, Mr. Molf took us to the quarry. He asked Evers, and Evers said, reluctantly, fine, like he was giving us permission to borrow his hat. We walked in a line behind him, our slates and chalk left behind, our eyes wide. Mr. Molf wore his good shoes and they got white with lime, and I thought how hard he would scrub them at night, and it made me want to help him scrub. Look, he said, pointing, this is how men make their way into the earth and ask it for what they need. He pointed to the kills. This is how the earth bites you back. He took us to the place where the oddman's box sat in the shade. It was just a wooden box with straw in it and some pieces of stone nestled in the straw like eggs. He picked one up and showed it to us. It had a small groove along it and a little bump that could have been the top of a tooth if you were the kind of person who wanted it to be. If you are not careful, he said, you will see what you want to see. That is as dangerous as seeing nothing at all. A bone is a bone whether you want it to tell you your story or not. We will listen to it, not make it lie. Noko picked up a piece and put it against his cheek. It is cold, he said, surprised. It has been in the shade, Mr. Molf said. He put the pieces back and put his hand flat on the side of the box. Children, he said, his voice softer, the professor in Johannesburg will write a paper about the stone child. It will be printed in a magazine in London that men read when they want to be serious. Men will argue about it. Some will say it is a monkey and that it means nothing. Some will say it is a person's child and will make churches nervous. Some will say men like to make noise, and that they will speak less after their tea. I don't know what it is. I know only this: if someone tells you that nothing of importance comes from here, tell them we sent a stone child to speak for us. The next Sunday, a week after my father twisted his foot and 2 weeks after the driver brought the letter with the draw of a skull, a different man came with the truck. He was younger than the first, with a hat that had seen less sun and a suit jacket that had seen more. He had a mustache like 2 little mice had slept under his nose. He said he came from Johannesburg too, from the same university. His name was Short, which we all enjoyed, especially because he was tall. He stood under the tree near the office and gathered men around him like a boy gathers goats. He had the look of a Sunday school teacher but the hands of someone who wrote things on paper. He spoke in a way that did not make anyone angry. He told them the professor had written to a paper in London and that the paper wanted to print his words about the skull from Tong. He said the professor had given our quarry a name in those words. He called it Buxton Lime Works. Mr. Evers nodded, pleased, and said, "That is the name of the company we work for too," in a way that made him sound like maybe he had not known that before today. Short told us more. He said the professor is certain that the stone child shows that an ape-like creature walked upright, and did it here long before other places thought of it. He said the professor writes about the hole at the bottom of the brain cast that says, "I hold my head this way, not that way." He said the professor writes that some Englishmen will not like this because they already had a skull found in England, he said Piltdown, and that the English skull looks the way Englishmen like to think human history looked, like it began with a clever brain and a big jaw. I listened like my eyes were a cup I was trying not to spill. I had never heard those words before, Piltdown, nature, evolution, but when he said them, my mind made a little space for them the way a man will move his hand and make a space for a child to sit beside him. I didn't understand all of it. The details were not what got me. It was the picture, men somewhere far away with books and ash on their sleeves arguing about a block of stone that had sat in our shade and rolled on our ground and frightened none of our goats. When Short was done speaking, men did the thing men do when they try to pretend something is small so it won't feel too large on the inside. They made jokes. "Tell them that the stone child was taught to walk upright by my wife," one said. "She can make anything stand straight." Another said, "It was taught by Mr. Evers. He likes upright very much." Another said, "It was taught by my mother. If you slouch, she throws her slipper." That night, my grandmother sat with her feet in a basin and leaned her head back against the wall of our yard. The stars were turned on like lamps, bright and sharp. The Milky Way hung there, an old spill that had not been wiped up. "We call it Safatsamagalo," she said, "the great footprints, though I had heard it called other things too." I lay on my back and put my hands behind my head and imagined the stone child's face in the smooth stones by the riverbed, listening to the same night. "Do you think he was scared?" I asked. "He? The one in the stone? The child? Scared?" She looked at me with one eye open and one closed. "Why?" "Because he had to grow up in a world where everything had teeth," I said. "I had seen bones in the belly of a hyena. And because everyone says he is an ape, not a boy. I think it would be hard to be something people did not understand." My grandmother thought about this. She had a way of thinking that was like when you knead dough, you turn it, you push it, you leave it alone for a while to rise. "We are all things that others do not understand," she said. "You do not understand why I hide the good sugar," she added, and I laughed. "Listen," she said, and she did not mean to the night, though the night had things to say too. She meant listen to the part of you that hears the old things. I think he was not scared. I think he looked at his mother and saw her teeth and was not afraid of them. I think he walked like a small fisherman, with knees like a bird. How do you know? I asked. She grinned. I have lived a long time, she said. People came out of the ground the way frogs do after the rain, unexpectedly and making noise. They came from Kimberley with their leather bags and their dust that smelled different from ours. They came from Vryburg with shirts that had more buttons than sense. They came with notebooks and questions. They asked me sometimes what I had seen when the men found the block. I told them the truth. I saw a hollow and a curve, and then later, when the professor sent a picture, I saw the face of a child made of stone. I told them that when I first looked at it, my chest felt like a drum. They wrote that down, though sometimes they wrote it down wrong and then looked at me as if I would agree to the wrong version. I was 12, but I wasn't foolish in that way. If you tell a man your goat has 3 legs, he will ask you to prove it. If you tell a man your heart beat like a drum because of something he does not care about, he will tell you your heart is silly. One man, an Afrikaans-speaking reporter from Bloemfontein, asked for a picture of me and then said in his story that I was a boy who watched history being made, and I corrected him and said, "How can anyone say when history